On this episode of the San Francisco Show, we'll be walking from the Ferry Building through historic Jackson Square with architect Lydia So and hearing some ragtime revival with parlor tricks. Let's go. If you were to visit San Francisco for the first time in the Ferry Building in 2021, you might think that this building was built as a public marketplace, but it was not. In 1898, this was San Francisco's first major project. Its ferry terminal, which linked the Transcontinental Railroad terminus in Oakland with San Francisco. And at its peak, 50,000 passengers traveled through this terminal every day. It was the second busiest transportation hub in the world. And so what happened? The completion of the Golden Gate Bridge and the Bay Bridge and the rise and domination of the automobile ended the ferry terminal's significance. It was converted into offices, and not until the year 2003 was it restored and made into a public marketplace. This area is referred to as the Great Nave. I think it's because it resembles a cathedral ceiling. The ferry terminal now houses restaurants, markets, gift shops. It's obviously become a very popular attraction for tourists and locals alike. A lot of the history of San Francisco leads us back to the 1890s, including the Ferry Building, and the hot music of the time was ragtime. And so today's guest is Eddie Scher from Parlor Tricks, who is keeping ragtime alive. So Eddie, tell me about your music.
Well, Parlor Tricks has been around. We started in New York, but we've been in San Francisco for about 12 years. And San Francisco was a center of this music going back to the 1890s. It's popular music. But something people probably don't know about it is that it was through composed music. It was more like classical music than what we think of as jazz. It turned into jazz, and it was highly influential on what became jazz. Syncopated style. But really, it's through composed music, the way classical music is, and there's something just phenomenal about it. The way for me, it makes me feel. It's hot music, it's syncopated music, and then there's also this sort of burlesque and vaudeville venues that it played in that are a lot of fun, and they're very connected to obviously our town.
Awesome. Are you composing new music all the time, or are you sort of playing the same set?
No, we're both composing music. So the idea of the band has never been to try to recreate what was happening in the period that we're very interested in, the beginning of the 20th century. We do a lot of songs from that era. We do a lot of songs that somebody would have been playing in 1890. But we do a lot of songs that are up through the swing era, so up through the 20s and then into the 30s, because that's the music that I really love, and it's a lot of fun to play. And then we also do a lot of composing. And part of it is because there's things you want to say that you can't say with old music sometimes. Sometimes you can.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so you told me that through the pandemic, you've been playing in Golden Gate Park at Spreckles Lake every Saturday. So tell me what inspired that choice.
Well, it was really about the connection you get from both playing music and engaging with an audience. Nothing else is like it, and you can't reproduce it any other way. And one of the things that is most exciting about it is that we found from early April when we started doing every Saturday at Spreckles Lake in the afternoon, the response we got from people walking around the lake who would stop and listen, who would stay there for 3 hours standing in the, as the sun went down and it gets colder and colder out there in Golden Gate Park, people wouldn't leave because they were having as much fun as we were having.
I love it. So what do you hope for in 2021 here? It feels like we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
It certainly feels that way. We're starting to play more and more. So we actually, well, when I say we, I mean the band is able to get together without our singer, without our horn players, but we do string things. So tonight we'll be, or Thursdays we're at Capo's on Vallejo in North Beach. We're doing things at the Liberties and the Right Spot. So we're getting to start to play a little bit again in a limited way. And I'm looking forward to getting my shot, everybody else getting theirs, and getting back to playing.
Nice. So, I think the video and the recording are really fun, but I think I'm guessing the real experience is to see you guys live.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the thing about improvised music, and what we're doing is taking that ragtime and we're putting it into the jazz context, and it doesn't. It's like a tree in the forest. You got to be there to listen. Performing it is meaningless without someone listening, and that energy that you get is amazing. That's what it's about.
So I'm about to share the song with the audience, but before that, tell me where our audience can find your music.
Well, you can always go to parlortricksragtime.com, and there's a list of our performances coming up, and there are music videos. There's also links to our recordings, so we're all there. You can actually just look for Parlor Tricks on Spotify or iTunes or Amazon, wherever you get your music. We're there as well.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to riding into the park and finding you guys on Saturday.
I appreciate the phone call. It's great to talk.
We're approaching Sidney G. Walton Square, which was designated by the city as an art space, but I think also a mitigation against the condominiums that were built here. This area was originally a produce wholesale market that was run mostly by Genovese Italians. Wholesalers would come from all over the area, including the peninsula, to this park, to this area, to sell their produce. As beautiful as this green space is here in the middle of San Francisco, there's a part of it that's, I think, the most significant, which is right up ahead. It's an arch that remains, that was preserved from the Colombo produce market. And it's appropriate because we're about to speak with Lydia So, who's a member of the Historic Preservation Commission here in San Francisco that is trying to both allow development and preserve the past. So today we have architect, developer, and Historic Preservation Commission committee member Lydia So with us today. Lydia, welcome to the show.
Hello, Barry. Hello, everyone.
So Lydia, we're going to head over towards Jackson Street right now. And maybe on the way you can tell us what the purpose of the Historic Preservation Commission is.
Yeah, I'll be glad to do that. Historic Preservation Commission is one of the two commissions which provide governance to San Francisco Planning Department. We have 7 commissioners. I serve on the architect seat to advise and determine issues on landmarking historic sites, cultural districts in the city, and approving legacy small businesses. We have the stewardship to carry on the storytelling of the history of San Francisco for our current and future generations. Historic preservation is not just always freeze everything that's called preserving, right? But it's preserving, restoring, and repurposing.
Perfect. So we've visited the Ferry Building today. We visited the Sidney G. Walton Park and talked about the produce market that was there. And you mentioned as an architect that you thought this street was very interesting. And you know, there are 2-story buildings here, and right behind them, skyscrapers or multi-story condos, and then skyscrapers. What would you like to tell us about this street?
Well, along Jackson Street, and also this whole area near Battery Street and also Jackson Square, it is one of my favorite snapshots in the city, where you can see, just turn around, standing in any corner, you can see a really interesting streetscape that is covered with trees, but then also the architecture type is so different. Like you can transcend yourself from a historical moment of classical building that had transformed into successful businesses, and also seeing buildings that were built in the exteriors cross-bracing steel frame from the 60s and 70s, and some newer developments. So it is an eclectic collection of very interesting building and streetscape in a human scale, and I really like that.
So we're right on the corner here of Jackson and Battery, and it's the old Custom House, which is, you know, classic federal-looking building here.
Right.
And we're heading up to the Hoteling Plaza or place.
Let's see. Yeah. Where you are at, it's like you can see a lot of really ornate brick building, and also the federal civic building that has the very classical, typical tripart facade design from European architecture. And then you're also seeing some newer development that has been shaped by what the City of Planning Department had developed, these sort of daylight streetscape for streets. So it forces building to have these little steps as you looked up to them. So I think that everyone would like to go there again along these streets. Just look up. If you feel safe to do so, look up and see. There are interesting building that looks like stair steps, because the city had planned to allow more daylight into all the streets, as we are forced to build things that are taller. Um, so we're not ended up looking like other high-rise crowded city where in the street is all really dark. So yeah, behind you is all these rustication of classical building. Yeah, it's one of
And
my favorite building.
yeah, it's beautiful. And actually, from where I was standing, you could just see the very tip of the Transamerica Pyramid poking out from the
Yes.
top in the background.
It's
Uh,
amazing with all the vintage point that you can see what you're surrounding yourself with, a piece of different histories of different decades of San Francisco development. And then when you look up, you always have that beacon to look at too. It's the Transamerica building.
yes. And so here's a corner that you pointed out to me earlier on the there's basically a corner full of brick buildings, and maybe you can talk about how you see brick as part of San Francisco's past.
Well, brick is a traditional building type, originated from Mason, right? And San Francisco has many of different types of brick building, and also through the land, through the earthquake we have, we continue to use brick. But then also, if you've seen other parts of the city, um, the type of brick is different. Some of them are cleaner. Some of them are actually more of a burnt brick, because if you look at in some parts of some church in Chinatown, they were basically having to rebuild by these partially burned brick, because there isn't that much material readily available. But the style is very West Coast, for the type of brick. It's always a very warm color, and I really love some of the building that you've seen, is actually not particularly too old, but it's actually still using the same brick material and patterns. I love that because it is a much smaller pattern that brings the human scale into life.
So you don't feel like you're standing beneath a huge tower, right, all the time.
Exactly. And it has its texture, and it has its own history to tell, because every brick is different.
Nice. So we're in the hoteling place alleyway here, and framing almost perfectly the Transamerica Pyramid.
Yes. I always love that street. It's a very interesting, very short hoteling place. You really have to go there by foot most of the time, because it demands the kind of speed. You have to slow down, and you looked around. It has that sense of scale that is not like any place you would experience in San Francisco. You looked around it, and it's looking very European and traditional. And I think it shows that there are different diversity and different history in different parts of San Francisco that had left its story and legacy to tell. And obviously, it had translated itself into a very vibrant, um, uh, mostly is commercial use and retail use for the streetscape. And it's just my favorite place to show that there are places in our city that it's thriving, and an adaptive reuse of historical spaces and streetscape.
We're right at the base of the Transamerica building. It until the Salesforce Tower was built recently, was the tallest building in San Francisco and actually the tallest building west of the Mississippi. It's iconic because it's so recognizable as a pyramid, and it has two wings that stick out, which apparently are the elevator shafts that go up. What do you think the pyramid building's place is in San Francisco's history?
Oh, I think that's an iconic building, and it's so sculptural, and it was a very innovative way of use of concrete at that time. And also just where it's located, it makes itself become a very tall landmark and icon for the skyline of San Francisco for many, many, many decades. And of course, tourism iconic spot. And it's designed by a famous architect, William Ferrera. And one fun fact about this is actually behind this famous name, there is actually a key architect who is also of Chinese American descent. Architect Jing Huang is actually his involvement in this project. It was incredible, and I would like to take this as an opportunity to also reflect upon any given masterpiece of any architecture or real estate development project has more people who had been unsung hero to make it a successful piece. And I myself, of course, being really proud to have actually recently become knowing that there are so many fellow Asian American architects and engineers who had shaped the skyline of what we call the city we love so much, San Francisco.
What a great answer. So we're right across the street from 447 Battery, and I will put up the rendering in a second, but I understand that this is a project that's under review, and the idea is to preserve the historical nature of the building, but also allow for development.
San Francisco, geographically, we are in a peninsula, so it's a 7 miles by 7 miles along the Pacific coast. So we're really unique, which means that in a sense that we really can't have all these extra land to expand like an urban sprawl like other cities, for example, Houston, Texas. If you need more land, you just add another ring of freeway. So what it means is that it challenges us to think and create zoning plans to make a delicate balance in determining where and how to build taller and denser buildings while retaining the historical significance of our communities and neighborhoods. So this is really fascinating because if you imagine you have to overlay these elements with our current challenges that we're facing, sea level rising, air quality due to forest fires, earthquakes, homelessness, and equality in real estate ownerships, and our economic resiliency coming out of this pandemic, we have a lot to consider. And this is a building that is just one of the many examples of how our city agency and commission take a really serious look at any given project in the very early beginning of the environmental impact report phase to evaluate the importance of the building itself and what is the project sponsor proposed to do in a particular neighborhood and its purpose and use for the future. So this one is a very interesting building. It's a brick warehouse, and the project sponsor is proposing to convert it into a high-rise hotel space.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think that was very informative, and I'm sure our audience will love to hear all of this. Have a great day. Thanks again for joining us.
Well, thank you, Barry. Bye.
Thank you very much to my guests Lydia So and Eddie Scher from Parlor Tricks for joining us today. If you like this tour, like and subscribe for more.